Cool. Hey, everyone. I'm here in sunny California because it's like really bad weather right now. So I'm huddled up in my garage, but it looks like I'm all like, overclothed for being indoors. It's because of that. Um, I am really excited to be inviting you in my studio. I've been working as an artist for since 2007 professionally. I show at Mark Wolf Contemporary in San Francisco, and then Elizabeth Houston Gallery in New York City or the Lower East Side. And then there's also, what is it? Oh, Modern Eating Gallery as well. Excuse me, I just got a sip of water. All right, so I did want to shout out aboveground.to on Instagram if you haven't followed them already. That's probably how you found out about this demo. Make sure you follow them. I'm Ryan Martin. So you can follow me at Ryan Martin Art. And then you could also follow Winsor Newton. We'll be doing a lot of demos at the Fine Art Collective North America. We just kind of put TFAC now on there for North America. And then you could follow all the demos we have there. I'm going to kind of refer to that Instagram page too a little bit, because if there's anything that you want to know more about, if you don't ask it here, we have a lot of demos there that cover a lot of oil demos. So I'm not sure how many people have been oil painting, or if this is kind of your first time kind of being curious about it, or if you've been oil painting a lot and maybe hopefully you're joining to kind of get some new knowledge about oil paint. I also want to share, like, if you have been an oil painter for a while, I might go over some of the basics, but I'm also going to be introducing some new colors that Winsor Newton put out. Which for an artist like me, I'm like always really excited about, because as you know, if just one new color comes out, you have like a new infinite amount of possibilities of colors you can mix. So I'll be going over the 8 new colors we have as well. I'm also going to be showing, we're going to be doing, while I'm talking about the materials, we're going to be doing a painting together. This is the painting I did in preparation for this. I spent about an hour in here, but I'm going to be on this painting, but I'm going to be talking as well. So I might do a little bit more of a brief sketch of this when I'm painting it, but I'm going to walk you through the process of oil painting and how I achieve kind of more blended textures, and then how I got some of the more meatier, I don't know if you could see the thickness of it, but the meatier strokes, like kind of what they would call impasto, like a Van Gogh painting. But to get started with oil painting, if you've never oil painted before, what oil paint basically is it's an oil. So we have, in this case, linseed oil, which is made from flaxseed. And you'll notice it's kind of like yellowish. So that's something that you might notice if it's in some of your whites or something like that. Sometimes when it dries, it'll yellow it a little bit. So sometimes you'll have some safflower oil in your oil paint, which is a lot more clear. But it also will keep it from drying as fast. So if you've heard of oil painting before, you probably already know it takes a really long time to dry. So when you're using a paint, it has a pigment and an oil in it. And when it's in the tube, I'm going to push this a little bit. Some of the oil might even come out kind of when I'm squeezing it. You'll see, I think this camera is going to zoom in. It's really thick, like a paste, but you could see it's pigment, which is either color that's come from the ground, or we've, if it's organic material sometimes as well. In history, we've had bugs that would crush up and get pigment from that. In other cases, now in modern times, we'll actually create it synthetically. And we got a lot of great colors that way. And it's oil that's been milled with the pigment. So you get a lot of color in there. But at the same time, it's pretty thick and kind of like a toothpaste consistency. But if I was to paint with the color, it's pretty thick. So sometimes it's hard to move across the canvas. Also, there's not a ton of oil in here. So if I kept painting with this, it might not be as strong as if I put a little bit of binder in it, which is what the oil is. So we usually typically will put a medium in the paint, and the medium is going to be a mixture of a solvent, because oil won't dissolve in water. So we'll use basically a paint thinner. Ours is called Sans Odor. So it's very low odor. When you're working with it, you'll still want to work in a ventilated place because it is a harsh chemical that is made to break down the oils. But it'll be low odor compared to like paint thinner you might have grown up with and smelled it when somebody's painting a house or something. But that's going to be breaking down your paint. So we use that kind of as water to break apart oil paint if it's on the brushes. But you'll usually, to make a medium, mix an oil with some of your Sansador, your solvent, and that creates a fluid that you can mix with your paint and get kind of, you know, more coverage out of it and more use out of it and do a lot of cool techniques. There's a lot of oils to think about when you're oil painting and mediums to mix in. So I don't want to scare anyone away. I feel like it's something I nerded out about a lot later in life, but there's like stand oil, there's cold press oil, there's poppy seed oil, there's all kinds of different oils that you could use. And there's each one so different in many ways. And in a lot of ways are similar, that they're very slick and oily, but they'll give you kind of different effects and finishes. Now, that might seem like a lot, like where do I even start? Do I grab an oil paint or oil of everyone and mix it with my paint and see what I like? You could try that. It's really good to see. On TFACNA, our Instagram page, we'll talk more about that, about the uses of different oils. But today I'm gonna go into a medium that Winsor Newton put out and I absolutely love. And I'm not kidding when I say I love it. I always buy like the biggest containers I could possibly get of it. So they do come in little containers. So if you get one, they'll come in little containers like this, and it's called Liquin Original. And Liquin Original is a medium that's, you know, it has basically its solvent in there, it's oil, and then has alkali, or it's an alkyd basically. So it's alcohol acid that's been that's treated the oil to make it kind of a medium that dries really fast. So if you've never seen any of this, I'm gonna start by showing you it. And we're gonna get started on a painting, and I'll kind of walk you through how the oil painting will work. Let me flip my camera real quick and get you a good view of my setup. So you should be able to see, hopefully, my canvas. I have my notes out here too, if you want to read ahead. I got my canvas, my setup. This is just an iPad I like to use as my reference. I like the iPad because then I can just kind of zoom in if I need to look at details. And my palette, I'm going to put a little bit of the Liquin out because I'm going to do a brief sketch of my composition. And if I went in with just my blue, again, this is going to be too thick. So it's just going to kind of stick to this canvas. So I'll get my liquid, I'm going to shake it up a tiny bit. It hardly separates, but with a big container like this, sometimes it'll get a little watery on top. And when I put it down, you're going to see it's pretty much like a jelly. And a little oh, I'm sorry. Was I muted?
Okay.
It said I was muted on. Okay, so it's kind of like a jelly. And if you notice, I got some Liquin on here. And then if I grabbed a little bit of the paint, it smears a lot more now. So you're gonna get a lot more use out of your paint. Oil paints tend to be, you know, sometimes you'll notice the price. You'll wonder why it's more costly and stuff. It's because you could get a lot more pigment with the oil than maybe like an acrylic. They could fit a lot more in there. So it's the mediums, you're going to be extending your paint. This is one of our new colors, Oriental Blue. And then another color I'm going to use to kind of sketch in the background is, or the composition is Ruby Madder Alizarin. And it's kind of similar to Alizarin Crimson. I love it. It's like a cool red. It's like a little rosier. You can see it's a beautiful color. I love this one. I typically will sketch out in like a purple. I notice like there's a lot of kind of purple undertones in my painting, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to sketch it in really brief. So I'll get a little bit of the red. And I just thinned out my paint. And then now if I'm going to start sketching it in. So I'm going to start in the center. I'm going to get like a little petal in here. Now I'm not going to be too concerned about, I want it to be more watery. So I'm going to dip my brush in the the Stanzador. That's the paint thinner I have. That's this one here. Because you notice it kind of skipped along the canvas, and that'll just kind of work like water a little bit. I don't want to use just Stanzador. I'm going to always put a little Liquin in every layer I have, because I want my layers of pigment to really laminate onto the surface of the canvas. I don't want them to kind of flake away over the years. So I'm going to sketch in the petals. You could always sketch this in first with like charcoal if you'd like, or graphite. I feel like I do a little better. I like my paintings more when I'm a little more freeform with them. When I let a petal get too big, you know, it just adds more character. I do love realism paintings, but in my own work, I like the process of it more. I do a lot of teaching, I work a lot, and I just love coming home and just kind of relaxing and letting things kind of flow out rather than being, you know, too concerned about how close to the image it is. But I do use it as inspiration. So I'm gonna kind of close to it. There's a petal down here. By the way, if anyone has questions, now is a good time to ask. I'm going to be covering some more later, so I'll let you know if anything you ask, I'll cover in a little bit, but I'm going to get this petal up here. I messed up, I don't care. I'm just going to keep going over it. Painting's nice like that. The medium is so pretty already when you put it on that you don't really have to worry too much if you're like a beginner painter. Oil paint, I feel like oil paint is pretty forgiving. Watercolor is something I found was really tricky, and then now the way I use watercolor is kind of similar way. I just let things happen now. I just kind of let go. See how many petals are there. There's around 3 here. I made them kind of big. I'm not too worried about it. Get this one in.
Are you using a bristle brush to do your drawing?
Oh, thanks for asking. This is going to be a synthetic hog bristle brush. This was the ones that we mentioned in the set. I use the filberts because they kind of have a rounder edge, which is good for getting softer strokes on the petals. Yeah, Winsor Newton put them out. They're like hog bristle, the same kind of thicker kind of bristle that'll move the paint around really fast. But I feel like they hold up, for me, they hold up a little better because the natural hairs tend to kind of like get brittle and kind of break a little.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I got this petal up here, it's kind of jutting out. All right, I'm happy with my flower. I'm going to go painting in anyway, so I don't need to get too many details in. I do want to mark off some major points, like this flower on the left is kind of has a lot of detail, so I'm going to include that. If you don't like a leaf, you can always edit it out. Just put this down here. What else should I do? Excuse me, my throat's been so dry with this dry weather. You got a petal, or not a petal, a leaf down here. I don't have to get too detailed with them. I just want to mark off where they're at. Again, we're going to render them later.
Ryan, can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about your experience with water-soluble Winsor Newton? That's been something I've kind of gotten into lately, and because I'm a watercolor artist, but I've moved into water-soluble Winsor Newton. And is there, you know, can you use any of these mediums that you're discussing also with the water-soluble versions?
With the water soluble versions, you'll want to use the they're the artisan label. You'll want to use the mediums we have with them. It's also like the main idea behind the water soluble ones is not having to have like solvents around. I had a friend that was pregnant recently, and that was kind of a lifesaver, is not having, you know, minerals, you know, like distillates around and stuff like that.
Sure
so it's a
thing.
great option. Like if you want to get, when your kids involved in oil painting, you don't have to have them working with paint thinner, you know, and worry about them as much. So you could kind of be there and kind of, you know, guide them through it. Or for, yeah, people who don't want to be worrying too much about the chemicals as much. But yeah, so the Liquin is still, you're going to want to work in a ventilated place because it does have a solvent in it too.
Okay.
But the artisans are great because they're water soluble, which is nice. So the cleanup is a lot easier with it. But it all comes to feel. So some people won't like the feel of it as much. I feel like now that I've been working with Winsor Newton, I've been liking the feel of it more because I haven't really got to try them because I have a full set of the oils. I mean the our artist oil colors. But it's worth a try, yeah, if you're kind of scared of working with the solvents because you're just not
Yes.
familiar with them. It's
Yes, for sure.
a good one to try. I
Cool.
just blocked
Thank
in
you.
some dark areas. Sometimes I forget I'm painting. It's just kind of so uh, so liberating and free. All right, get some of these in. All right, let's get a leaf in here. And then I think I'm going to be about ready to start renting a petal. I'm just going to check my time, make sure I'm in a good spot. Cool. And that's going to be all kind of abstract. I'll cover that too, what we're talking about. All right, next thing I want to mention is I'm going to be painting in the petals. And now I have to start mixing paint. And a good tip, if you ever taken like an art class, usually something they'll tell you is don't put all the paint. Like don't put like 30 colors on your palette of everyone you see. You want to practice kind of mixing them. Also, naturally in nature, everything's kind of has a filter to it. If it's a sun setting, it puts a filter of orange in it. So all the colors kind of harmonize together. So if you can, a good tip is to kind of limit your palette. So today I limited my palette to, it's going to be titanium white, transparent orange, which is a new color for us. The mineral green deep, which is also a new color for Winsor Newton. Ruby madder alizarin, also new. And then the oriental blue, which you already saw as well. So I'm going to be using pretty much just these 4 colors to create the whole painting. Oops. That was fun. What's great about oils though, is you could just wipe it off. So I'm gonna just wipe off my paint tube real quick. For the petals, I see there's definitely a lot of white. So I'm gonna squeeze out some titanium white. Once I get this tube less messy. And titanium white's kind of your go-to. It's very opaque. We have other whites like zinc white that's more transparent. But I want to just get good coverage. I want to tint my colors. Tinting is when you add white to a color. Shading is when you add like a black or a darker color. So you see it's a nice bright white. A rule of thumb with oil painting is you never want to use pure white unless it's going to be like something reflecting the sun, something shimmery. Just because value is kind of subjective. And if we put everything stark white, then it'll start to get a little flat. So we're always going to be kind of changing up our white a tiny bit, even though we see like a white petal. There's a lot of yellow kind of in those colors. I'm not using yellow, but transparent orange kind of has a yellowy undertone when I mix it with the white. So I'm gonna put a little bit of the transparent orange out. I'll show you my palette too once I get up. Or actually, let's tilt it down so you can see what I'm doing. So I just have titanium white, transparent orange, and I mixed the, if you see transparent orange, you could see it's very transparent. You can see the white showing through it a lot. And here's a good example of the transparent orange. I'm always chasing transparent colors because I like to do a lot of glazing. I'll talk about that at the end today. And you could see what's underneath it. Most of these colors are kind of transparent. These are the new ones. A warm brown pink isn't. It's pretty opaque. But yeah, that's just like a little swatch of the colors I have. I like to make these whenever I get a new color to see how the transparency is. I'm going to put out, I already have the blue and the red. I feel like that might be pretty much enough for me to go off of. I am just going to put out the green since that was my last color of the ones I'm using today. I'll still show you the other ones a little later so you could see how they feel, because those might be some favorites of yours. Actually, we will add some warm brown pink if we have a chance. So for the petals, you can mix with the palette knife if you're mixing like a lot of paint. I am used to painting really big, so I'll use a palette knife if I'm mixing like really, if I need to cover a lot of area. So I'll probably be mixing mostly with my brush, but I will show you how I mix with the palette knife. They come in a lot of different sizes. I don't know, anyone pretty works well. We're gonna be palette knife painting later today, so that's primarily why I have it. But if you're gonna be painting with it, I'm always gonna add a little liquid right to every layer. I'm just gonna mix kind of like a medium gray. So when I'm mixing gray, what's important is you're going to be mixing opposites together. That's the cleanest way to get a gray real fast. So what's the opposite of blue? I have some blue. It's kind of like a orange or yellow orange. Luckily, I have transparent white. So if I get some blue and I mix it with my, you'll see the Liquin color doesn't really affect the white at all, which is nice as well. The drying times in oils, I believe it's going to be always like a few days to like 2 weeks. And for water mixable oils, it's going to be very similar. And unless you're adding a medium to it, that's going to kind of enhance the drying time. So you got the blue. I'm going to add, so you can see it's a very beautiful blue. I'm going to add a little bit of the transparent orange, and that's going to start graying it down a little bit. Or a lot. So that's pretty a powerful color. I do have this kind of greenish color in there. And then I'm going to make like a little pink. I'm going to keep what's on my dirty palette knife because it is a great gray. And I'm going to make just like another little batch of gray. That's a little warmer. That's a cold gray. Colds, we think of like blue, wintry kind of things, right? Warm, we think about like fire and sun, like reds and oranges and yellows. So those are going to be your warm colors. Just something to kind of play with. And then I might be mixing with my brush a lot, you'll see. It's always good to have great palette habits, but I never follow them. My students, I'm always like, make sure you make nice clean piles. And then my studio, I'm mixing with my brush the whole time. Let's see. All right, so there's a nice little pink. So I kind of got a green and pink complementary colors. When you use complementary colors next to each other, they kind of create the illusion of light. That's the way light works. It's opposites. It's like light and dark versus warm and cool and stuff like that. All right, let's get to painting. So I'm going to use a bigger brush. That's another good tip. I used to paint with like a tiny little brush, the whole thing. My teacher would be like, no, use the big brush. The big brush is great because you're just going to block out your idea right away. I believe I recommended like a 8 or 10 on the filbert on your worksheet if you're following along with us today. Don't feel like you have to keep up with me. You could paint one petal, and if I jump to the next area, jump to the next area with me. Sometimes I get these in a little fast. Let's see how I do today. So I'm noticing there's kind of shadows in. I'm going to block in the darks first. Now the reason why I also mix my color for this is I don't want to put something in too dark, too fast. If I create too much contrast, it's not going to glow as much. So I'm trying to work with low contrast. Another tip artists sometimes do is they'll put a whole color over the whole canvas just to get rid of the stark white. Since I'm painting something so light, I decided to work on the light because I could let that kind of bleed through. So right now, the white canvas is kind of bleeding through and showing through this kind of greenish blue I painted. There's a lot of things going through my head right now that are kind of just muscle memory. So I'm going to try my best to kind of tell you what I'm doing. I'm grabbing paint. I'm not grabbing a big blob like this. I'm grabbing just a tiny bit. Oil is really slick and greasy, and it's going to smear out really easily. So sometimes if you get too much oil paint or even acrylic paint on your brush and you're trying to do blending techniques, it's going to be hard. You're going to have too much paint on your brush. I could even dab off some of my paintbrush or have a paper towel in my hand to kind of squeeze off the paint if I have too much paint on my brush. And the roundness of your brush tip is what you could use to kind of blend it into the lighter areas. For now, I'm just thinking about shape. I'm blocking in this shape because it's dark. This shape is kind of dark here. This is in the shadow. It's not the correct color, but I'm not too worried about it. I just want to block in my form first. Excuse me, dry throat. This is kind of needs to get more purpley in here, so maybe I'll hold off on that. There's kind of this greenish color here. I forgot a petal. Let's add it last minute. How long do I get to paint on this part? I can paint on this forever. Let's do like this. Let's get this here. It's so soft. I don't know if you could hear the sound, but I really love this. It's like ASMR a little bit. Just like the whole process of oil paint. Can you tell? I'm just crazy about it. It's so much fun. All right, now I'm gonna get some more purples because I have purples. I could use a palette knife to mix it, but I'll show you how to mix with my brush. I'm just gonna snag a little of the ruby madder alizarin and a little bit of the oriental blue because I don't need a lot of it, right? The oil goes a long way, and mix a purple. Now you might be wondering like, well, whenever I try to mix grays, they don't come out so clean. A good tip with Winsor Newton, and this I noticed this later when I started using Winsor Newton early on in my youthful ages. I didn't know about single pigment colors. So all of these new colors we have, the 8, all have single pigment. So we know pigment, what I talked about a little bit earlier, was about, see, that's a little dark, but that's all right. I'll just add a little white. Let me put some out. Single pigment is gonna help you when you're mixing your colors, because if you have a pigment, like say you have a purple or a blue or something, and it's kind of a warmer blue, you might not know it, but the paint brand might be putting 2 pigments in there. So to read what pigments you have, you could see pigment on the top of the tube and read PB156. That's the pigment that our chemists use to kind of formulate this. And the vehicle or the binder basically is linseed oil. Safflower oil was that clear oil. That's probably because this is blue. They don't want it to yellow too much with the linseed oil. And then it shows transparent is an open kind of square. If it has a blocked out square, oops, like this, block, that means it's going to be opaque. And if it has like a cross through it, that means it's either semi-transparent or semi-opaque. But the pigment, if you have one pigment, you're going to be able to mix your colors a little bit more clean. If you have several pigments in your paint and you're mixing two colors together that have more than one pigment, you're mixing colors on the wheel you don't really realize. And then you might start getting mud. And it just doesn't really happen in nature that much, those kind of muddier, murkier colors that are reflecting into your eye. So that's why we try to mix a cleaner color with single pigments. And when Winsor Newton does make pigment or colors that have more than one pigment, it's usually just like a convenience color, like it might have white in it or something like that. Or like sometimes there's more tones that are used more like with fleshy tones and stuff like that. They might add like another pigment, but otherwise single pigments is kind of something that they strive to do because it just gives artists more control. They know what they're working with and how they're mixing their colors. Any questions right now? It's going to take me a minute just to get the shadows in. Going to work in some more pinks here. I haven't worked the pinks in. They're kind of pinkish shadows. And you can see I'm just going right on top of the other color. I'm barely using the tip of the brush when I want to blend. So you could see barely, I'm just doing this motion slow so you could see. And that's how I get very soft blended colors, because when I'm painting, it's just barely skimming the top and barely moving the paint. So even though this is this oil synthetic hog brush, which has like more firm bristles, you could still get really soft techniques in there, as well as very like bold ones, when people kind of throw in really bold marks in there. All right, I'm going to start getting some yellow in. I don't have yellow, so I'm using the transparent orange to kind of make a yellowy color. And that's kind of at the center of the flower. Ooh, you can't see my flower anymore. Was anyone joining along, like painting right now with me? I was curious about that. I was like, oh, that's so fun. I know I might seem a little on the younger side, but I'm actually 40 this year. So I always explain to my students, I'm like, when I had to learn how to paint, we couldn't just go on YouTube. We had to go to PBS and watch Bob Ross painting. And so it's so great. I love being able to paint on Instagram, and the thought of people kind of painting along or watching this later on YouTube and painting along is really exciting. Be sure to follow me at Ryan Martin Art and tag me in the video if you do this painting, because I'd love to see it. I'm going to put this little oranges in there. So just kind of jumping around. My flower, I really left this. I'm just using this as a reference. I'm really letting the paint kind of dictate how it's going to look. And I feel like that's my favorite part of painting, is just kind of letting go a little bit. My brush is kind of dirty with the other paint I use, so I'm going into pure white. I'm painting a polymer clay sculpture. Whoa, you're gonna have to direct message me a picture so I could see what you're talking about. That'll be cool to see. All right, so I got a lot of light white in here, but again, it's not pure white. It has a little bit of the color that was on my brush. It was looked like some greens and pinks. And then I'm going to start going into the lightest areas and blocking it in. It's going to be kind of hard to see because I have such a white canvas, but I'm going to lightly fill in, cover up all the canvas, letting it melt. Remember, barely touching the canvas with the tip of my brush is going to create very soft transitions. And the Liquin really allows the paint to move more. The Liquin original medium, so that's why we use mediums with paint. If you're not using like linseed oil and solvent, Liquin, again, is a great alternative to that. I was working as an illustrator, well, not working as an illustrator, but I was trained as an illustrator first. So like when I was in school, the way I heard about Liquin was my teacher was using it because she was an illustrator and she needed to bang out projects. And Liquin is going to cut your drying time by several days. And that's really important for illustrators or painters like me. If you have a professional, following, you're going to have to pump out art for art shows. I have a couple, 3 or 4 art shows this spring that I have to create work for. I work in a lot of layers. I don't really paint like this, a la prima, wet into wet. I usually will layer up my paintings. And in order to do that, I need the layer to dry thoroughly. So Liquin will sometimes be drying towards the end of my paint session and then, be fully dry by the next day or 2. I do live in California though, so it tends to be drier. But if you live somewhere where it's more humid and you don't want to do oil painting because it takes forever to dry, Liquin's also great for that. So I'm just putting in a little white. I do want to put pure white in here, but I always reminding myself, it's just human nature wants to just go for the white or the dark, the contrast, but I'm trying to hold back. It's a little more realistic if we keep the values low for this flower. It's very impressionistic. I'm liking this. I'll leave some of the strokes in. I was going to show you how to, I blended out these other strokes, but I really like the brush strokes in the more detailed parts of the flower, so I'm going to leave them. If that's okay with everyone. All right, so I still haven't really cleaned my brush at all. So I want to show you how I do that because I'm going to reset my brush. I'm using the solvent again. So if you're unfamiliar with oil painting, can't use water. Do not put this oil down the sink. It's not good for your pipes or anything or the environment with it just going down the drain. So we're going to use Sansador to break down the oil. And you could get just like a jar or something. They have these at above ground. You could get something glass. You're not going to be putting it in a plastic cup because it's going to break down anything that's oil-based, like polymer-based. I just run the bristles on the bottom and it'll clean out your brush. And I'm going to dry off my brush really well. And always make sure you cover your solvents because you don't want to breathe it in. It is harsh to break apart all those oils. And then my brush is pretty clean. I dried it off pretty well. Now it's still going to have some of the solvent in there. So I have to be careful. If I'm going to grab paint and paint on this, it might melt away what I have if there's a little solvent. So I'm going to use this brush a little later, or just in a moment here actually, because I'm going to mix some colors. There's a lot of greens. I don't have that exact green. I limited my palette, right? This is going to help it feel more harmonious. So I have my mineral green. My mineral green deep is a new color. And then I need a yellowy color. I don't have one. Let's see what I did on this one. Oh, we need to get the background in. Let's get the blue sky in actually first, and then we'll work in some greens. You can see the background I did much more abstractly on this one. So I'm gonna actually just show you how I mix with my brush. All right, there is a little solvent on there, so I got to keep in mind it's gonna thin out my paint a little bit. So I'm gonna just get a new area in my palette, grabbing a little of the Liquin, making sure you're mixing the Liquin evenly with the blue. This blue is so like electric. Oh no, this is just a standard Winsor Newton canvas. They do. I'm glad you mentioned that. It was Liquitex, right? I think or something has the new recycled canvas. I'm putting a little green in my blue because it was a little too blue. I'm also gonna put a dot of the orange that's gonna dull it down. Let's add white so we can see what color we're actually mixing. I like that. All right, it doesn't match completely, but we do have that. Ooh, you're seeing all the fun mistakes. I just painted my iPad. But yeah, so it's gonna be pretty close to it. Let's get a little lighter. Too orange. That's pretty close. I like that it's a little more colorful. That's fine. Should I try wiping off my iPad? Let's try it. Oil just wipes off easily. So if you do make a mistake on your painting, keep in mind you can just grab a paper towel and wipe it right off. All right, sorry, just a moment. I'm gonna see where I'm at time. Okay, so we're thinking about warm versus cool. Another thing with warm versus cool is not only can you mix warm and cool colors to create kind of a nice gray, but you could create in your composition something that pops forward, like this flower is a cool pink, but there's oranges in there. That orange is warm, so it's gonna pop forward. So when you're looking for reference photos, it's helpful when you have something with like a cool background. Cool colors naturally recede and warm colors naturally kind of pop forward a little bit. So I don't care that I'm have this a little bluer because I think it's gonna create a little bit more depth. I'll get a little bit more of my Liquin so it could spread a little easier. I'm gonna get in my sky. Well, I'm making it a sky. There is like a little building back there. You could include the building. If you do, send me a picture. I want to see how you paint it. My edges got really soft here. That's something like Leonardo da Vinci would do. He always painted soft edges. But I'll probably come in and make them sharper later. That's just kind of the look I want. So I'm gonna go back later. I'm gonna paint between these little leaves I saw. I'm gonna do this kind of very abstractly, just kind of or impressionistic, just kind of throwing them in to block out the whole background. I could always paint leaves on top after. The paint is, I'm fighting the canvas texture a little bit, soaking it right up. So put a little bit more Liquin and you can see it's greasier, that greasy feeling, or just really slick on the canvas, which is what I love about oil. I'm gonna save my little, what is that called? A rose hip. Anyone have any questions while I'm blocking in the background? I'm not sure how many I missed down there. Let's move back a little to see what we have. I mean, you get a lot of depth already, right? Like the flowers popping forward, the sky's pushing back. It's cool. You could see like we've only been painting really for only like a half hour. And you could see we got a lot in already, a lot of form in. I kind of just want to paint the whole background blue. It's looking so pretty the way it is, but I want to show you the leaf techniques later because we're gonna dig into a really fun medium. A different one than the Liquin original. So I'm blocking that in. There's some blue that comes down here. I basically painted over everything I just had sketched out, but I am keeping some of the major leaves in there so I know where I'm going. Excuse me. All right, this whole bottom part's dark. So I'm gonna go into mixing something dark. There's still white in my brush, so it's not gonna get too dark. I'm gonna get my dark colors. So I have blue, green, and then the dot of the red. And it'll create like a nice, close to like a black, a bluish black. And I'm just gonna block it in. The white of the canvas is gonna show through a lot, but there's a little white in my brush. So hopefully that kind of, works to fill in the canvas a little better. When I get up here, I'm just gonna leave a stroke or two. My idea for creating abstract things is it always works out better if I do less. So to make like a little abstract background, because I don't feel like rendering all the little leaves perfectly soft how they are there. I'm just gonna lay down the paint, outline this edge a little bit, and then kind of do a stroke here and there, and then try not to overwork it. When I play with it too much, then I don't know. I'm not as happy with the brush stroke. So you kind of have to work out what you like most. And just a heads up, this Demo is going to be running probably about 90 minutes. So we're almost about halfway done, or more than halfway done if we're going to do a little Q&A after. So I'm going to just breeze through this part real quick. So this part it might take a little longer with, but I want to make sure we have time to get to everything. So I'm going to kind of scrub this in fast. Sometimes the best work is when you're kind of under a little time pressure. I was doing a series of portraits. I did like 50 of them where they all had to be under 50, or right, all had to be under 30 minutes was my goal. And some of my best work was the ones I did like in 5 minutes, like a 5-minute portrait. I'm just gonna lightly go over these because I want to feel what I'm doing more, and this white is very distracting. That's why people sometimes color a color first, a ground they call it, let it dry, and then paint on top of it later. All right, I like it. Now, I want to get some really, really darks in there, so I'm going to wash my brush out. And you can see we did most of this with our large brush already. I'm washing the brush, that's just kind of rubbing it in the bottom of the jar in the Sansador, the solvents. The brush bristles kind of get stained with the pigment. There's a lot of pigment in our paint, so if you see the blue, it is pretty much clean. It's just over time, lots of use, the pigment will kind of get caught in some of the fibers. I'm going to go for some black. So the best way I found to make black with this is our two darkest colors that I have out are the Oriental Blue and then our Ruby Madder Alizarin. Remember that I dropped on my palette earlier. A tiny bit of Liquin. Liquin will make your paint more transparent, and with black, I want it to show through really easily. So you can see these two colors together made pretty much black almost. Well, if I add white to it, it'll be violet, of course. But when I paint it in, I'm just gonna kind of poke holes in my painting. Now, a lot of painters you might hear like, we're like, never use black, like out of a tube. And I, or don't darken your color with a black. I feel like black is a very useful paint tube to have on hand, like if you want to do a monochromatic painting, or if you're painting something that is black, like there's a lot of, things we have in this world now that have like black plastics and black jackets and stuff like that. And sometimes that's pretty, you get really cool effects with that. Black will typically, though, the black paint will just, if you use it on something more like realistic, if you're doing an impressionistic painting like we're doing today, when it'll kind of just cancel out all the colors that are in it. And a lot of these aren't really pure blacks. Like if I zoom in, oops, my Instagram page, sorry. If you zoom in, there's kind of like reds in the black and blues in the black. So there really isn't the pure blacks in there because there's a light spectrum hitting all the shadows still a little bit, or some of the shadows, and it's reflecting colors. Also, color is kind of subjective. If you put a green next to a black, the black's going to your brain's going to kind of want it to crave red because it's on the opposite of the color wheel. So those things will happen. So that's why we'll typically not use black, because there's all these kind of color theory things that are happening. All right, I'm painting slow. Let's paint faster. There's some red leaves, so I'm going to get some red and some orange. I'm leaving the blue in my brush because I want it kind of muddy. And again, if you limit your palette, you won't get, like complete mud or unusable colors. When you have single pigment colors, you'll be able to kind of play with more. There's kind of these red leaves, which create some interest in the background. So add some of those in. We'll just add that all around. There's kind of this big leaf that comes in the foreground. With the orange on my brush, I'm just going to grab some green and a little bit of white, and I'm going to block in the leaves I have. And my leaves are much grayer. I don't have a yellow I'm working with. I limited my palette to these new colors. I like to see how far I can get away with it. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and reach for, like a Hansa yellow or something. But for now, I'm just going to be working in the greens that I have, which will be on the grayer side. let's see how green I could get this. So the mineral green deep right out of the tube it's not a very vibrant green. It's much more delicate. It's not as cold as Viridian. Viridian's kind of a delicate green too, like it easily gets toned down. But Viridian green tends to be a really cold, and this is just, I don't know, it feels very natural. It's kind of like I know it's a green, but it feels like an earth tone almost, like a green you would see. I guess that's why they call it mineral green deep, but it feels like something you would see like in a rock or something, right? Not so much in a leaf, but we're going to use it in a leaf. And then keep in mind the way the leaf pulls out. So conceptually, the brush stroke works, even though it doesn't look exactly like a leaf right now. I'll put little veins and stuff later. We're going to be doing an impasto technique shortly. So I'm just going to leave the leaves kind of abstract. I feel like I want a big leaf up here. Let's block in. You didn't see that, did you? We're going to block in just like a big portion. There's this little rose hip here. I've been doing everything with my big brush, so I block it all in first, and then later I'm going to go to my smaller brush. I'm just going to throw in a few strokes. So I'm kind of squinting at my picture, seeing where things look too flat. It was too flat here, so I'm just throwing little brush strokes in there to kind of fill out that top. All right, rinse out my brush. This is very important if you're doing acrylic. With oil, not so much, because it's not going to dry out right away, but it's still good to kind of keep your brushes clean in case you do walk away and you never come back to your studio that night. You don't have broken brushes. I'm going to finally go to my small brush. So you could have your 2 or 1 bright brush or filbert. And we're going to start getting in a few details before we, go in and palette knife paint. Let me just check my notes, make sure I'm covering everything. All right, cool. Yeah, we're going to start impasto painting shortly. Details in the flower. I mentioned I want to start getting in some more pure whites. I do want to put a little bit more rosy colors in here. So I'm going to get my ruby madder alizarin on my palette has been compromised with some other colors. So I'm going to put some fresh paint out. So this is the pure ruby madder alizarin. I'm going to get some of the white. And I'm going to try not to color it too much. There's a little blue in there, I don't mind. I'm always going to put a little Liquin, right? The Liquin is going to help it dry. It's going to help it move on the canvas better and probably stick to it. The paint I have down a little better as well. If I just put pure out of the tube paint on a thinner layer like that, that's wet, it might not stick as well. So I got a really vibrant pink. Now this is just, I don't know if you could see, but it's really glowing compared to what I have down. But I'm going to go in some places where I want it lighter and just start to put in little details. Let's get a closer shot. I could even let it be a little on the thicker side. Let me see. Oil paint's cool because you could almost get a little sculptural with it. We're going to get very sculptural in a little bit. And I'm going to let the pink and yellow vibrate next to each other. I'm not going to blend it in too much. It's kind of like a pink edge on the top of the flower with like light poking through. So I'm going to put a little bit of light. I have too much paint on my brush, so I'm going to wipe some off for blending. Too much paint on my brush for blending. Wipe some off and then blend the bottom edge. Now I have a sharp edge on the top and a soft edge on the bottom. Again, when I'm blending, I'm just barely touching and I'm making sure I don't have too much paint on my brush. If you have trouble blending, sometimes you could just get a completely clean brush and use that to blend. You use one paintbrush to apply and the other to blend. I've gotten a lot of skill down with this now, so I could usually do it with one brush, but try it out. It's one of my favorite kind of blending techniques. You can see that petal is kind of really glowing now. Let's get you focused. Focus. My phone wants to just focus on the iPad today. Ooh, I just saw the chat has a lot of comments. Let me know if there's any questions out there while I'm getting some of the details in. I'll kind of still talk you through this. I'm just trying to clean up the edges. There's little sharp bits where the light catches on the tips of the petals. The sun was definitely far left on this painting. So I'm gonna put a lot of the highlights on the left-hand side. And then on this side, kind of where it's catching, I don't know, this petal needs to pop forward a little. So I'll put a little, that light pink there. Scrub this in, just a light here. Ooh, that's cool. See those accidents happen? That little paint stroke looks so realistic. It's just the way the paint, the way oil paint is just made up. You get these really natural effects with little effort. You just have to know when to edit yourself. Be like, don't overblend that. That's something I would totally do, overblend that out. Let's just leave it. This is kind of on light, so I'll put a little pink there. The petals naturally have this kind of veining. I'm not going to be able to paint all that veining in with the time I have. So I like to kind of limit the time I have and then shorthand it. You know, you're kind of just getting in little brush strokes that kind of are growing out from the center, and you get that kind of effect. This is kind of looking messy. At first I liked it, but I'm like, it might need some structure. So I'll add a little more structure to this part. Oh, there's a whole petal I left out in here. Let's just add it now. It's not too late, is it? It's never too late to do the right thing. If you didn't like this at all, you could just wipe it all off with a paper towel and start again. So don't feel like you're ever, you know, having to commit to what you have. I do that sometimes where I'm not feeling it a half hour in, restart, and then the second one comes out way better. But I am liking this. It's been fun. Can you hear the cars going by? It's pouring out there. It sounds like, why is my voice so dry when it's raining out? All right, let's get this in. Let's do a brush stroke here too. Now just giving you the impression of different colors. All right, let's get to thick painting. I want to make sure I show this. Oh, sorry, one more thing. This is looking too flat right here, too much color close together. So I'm going to get a blue, a darker blue I had, and try to separate this petal. It's sometimes good to go get a drink of water, go to use the restroom, walk around the block, come back at your painting and see it with fresh eyes. I can't really see those fresh eyes because I don't want to make you all wait while I walk around the block. But I kind of just looked around the room and then looked back at it, and I noticed that these petals were too separated. So we're just going to divide them up with a few little strokes, clean up my brush, and then we're going to talk about Liquin Impasto. All right, so for Liquin, we have, you know, our Liquin Original, which you can buy in these little containers. A lot more convenient unless you're doing like 4x5 foot paintings like I'm doing usually. But you could get like little bottles of it. They also have Liquin light gel, which also speeds up the drying time, but it's good for glazing. And I'll show you an example of glazing a little later. We also have Liquin Fine Detail, which is, again, speeds up the drying time, but it's if you notice, it's a lot more watery than our like Liquin Original, which is kind of like in gel form. So you're going to be able to get really fine details, and it's not going to hold the brush stroke. It's going to be kind of more liquidy. So that's good if you're, you know, needing to get really small details, windows in a building, hairs on, you know, a person's going over a person's face. You need really a medium that's a lot thinner than the Liquin. That's kind of almost like a melted jello kind of consistency. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have these impasto kind of mediums. Liquin has, so Winsor Newton has a Liquin Oleo Pasto, which is, it's kind of like, has less peaks when you mix it with your paint, but Liquin Impasto will keep the peaks. It'll kind of be like a Van Gogh painting. If you like Van Gogh and you always wanted to do one in oil paint, this would be the way you could save cost on your paints, because your paints, you know, that could be like half a tube I just squeezed out, right? Like right there. But that's just, you know, it's going to be cheaper because the pigment is pretty much what you're paying for the most with paints. So I'm going to put some of this on my palette without dripping the other stuff all over. And you're going to see, I'm going to put a lot of it. We're going to have fun today. very thick and chunky. So you can make a peak that thick if you wanted to. We're gonna mix that with our paint. This goes a long way. Like I've had this for a while. I've done a few paintings already. And it comes in I think because it's just coming in this big container. So it's pretty much like Liquin original, but it's thick. And I'm gonna put a little bit of color in there. We're gonna do some really thick leaves and see how thick we can get the paint. So we have contrast between the thinner paints, the thin, smoother petals, and then we have this thick paint. You're gonna see it's so thick. Let's divide it up. Let's put a little over here. Now, I'm not gonna put that much, I'm not gonna have to put that much green in it to kind of change the color. So you can see I just used a little bit, like a pea-sized or a little lima bean size of green, and that's gonna color all this paint. It's gonna make it a little transparent, so you could keep that in mind. But this, whoa, let me tighten my stand. This mineral green deep is opaque, which means opaque color, it's not gonna be as transparent. So it's really gonna get good coverage. Even though I'm putting a ton of medium in here, it'll dry more opaque than if I use one of the transparent colors. So that's my little tip for you. You wanna use the Liquin Impasto medium, add an opaque color, and then the transparency won't matter. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna have less pigment in there, but you could always do like half and half, and it's gonna be really hard to tell the difference. I mean, for here, you can see the color intensity is pretty similar. Let's check it out, let's test it. It's gonna have less of the pigment in there, but at the same time, you're not gonna be wasting all the pigment like underneath. So you can see it's still very similar. The color is pretty much the same. If anything, I say this one's a little cooler now, maybe a little bluer. So maybe the way the pigment's refracting in there brings out kind of the cooler color. And then we could lay it on thick. Oh, let me see. I see some questions coming through. What were those? I didn't get to see. So I'm going to just start painting palette knife, and almost like frosting a cake. If you've never frosted a cake, this could be your first one. It's going to go on really thick, and you get this really cool effect. And right away, I don't know, it just piques the interest of viewers when you put in thick paint, because something you don't see as often with oil paint anymore. I see it mostly with like acrylic painting. So it's cool when you have like oil painting effects, and then with the Liquin Impasto. Oh, I see. It was the artisan. I'll have to check on that. The artisan, you should direct message me. I'll definitely ask about that. But the artisan ones, we recommend you using the artisan mediums. The Liquin Impasto, you'll probably want to use with the your regular artist oil colors. But I could definitely look into that. If I want it dark, I'm going to just grab some of my dark, mix that into some of my, oops, I got some on my finger. Let me wipe this off. So now I got some dark ones, a little bit of dark with the green, just kind of put it on really thick. Let's do a close-up shot next so you can see what's happening. I'm also going to get a bigger palette knife. I use the smallest palette knife. What do you think? Should we go this big? Let's try it. I'm gonna swirl in some of the lighter one just to see kind of what happens. Let's go in close. Let's do it like on the top. And I'm thinking like a leaf kind of comes out like this. I don't know, this leaf looks like it's dying or something now with the white, but you could kind of get really cool effects. And you can imagine just doing a full abstract painting with this, or even like people like to do portraits. Just like instantly, again, for me, I always have to hold back. I always want to overwork anything. I'm just like, nope, gotta leave it. And get some more green. I'm being really heavy-handed with this. I just really want to show you how thick you can get on the paint. And this isn't going to take months to dry, as like, I mean, the oil paintings in general, you want to wait months to dry, of course, before you varnish it. But this is going to set up a lot faster than if I was just to use pure oil paint like this. That's going to take, could take years to sometimes dry completely underneath, or it might never. But with a Liquin Impasto, it's going to just kind of set up a lot better and be dry to the touch a lot sooner. I'm adding some light ones now. I feel like the leaves have the little like kind of ribbing in there. So I could do little impressionistic strokes like that. A lot of fun. Okay, I could be done with my painting, but let's work more into it. I'm going to put one in the foreground. Anyone ever have trouble figuring out when? I have good advice for this. When a painting is done. My best advice is to invite a friend. It's always good to invite a friend to visit your studio, or you could Zoom call if you know you need to. If you're far away from your friend, and you could just say like, hey, what do you think? I have a colleague of mine, Kristen Brown. Shout out to Kristen Brown. She always will like text me, what do you think? Is this done? And we'll typically find something in each other's work and be like, oh, what about this? And then you just don't take advice. Don't take offense if somebody doesn't take your advice, or if you don't take theirs, hopefully. But yeah, you could just kind of decide together. It's always good to have kind of fresh eyes. So I'm going to ask you, if there's anything that stands out to you I could change or add. But just don't take offense if I don't take the advice right away. Let's get a little more details. I'm going to scrub a little. I feel like it just adds all these different things. I don't like parts of that, but that's okay. I could just wipe it off later. If there's something you don't like, you could always rub it down or paint on top of it. I'm just going to kind of do a little painting with my paper towel. And then add some more of my blue that I had before to kind of fill it in. I did want to paint in that rose hip, so I'm going to get my small brush and there I am painting my iPad again. I'm looking through my screen while I'm painting, so everything, the depth perspective is like all off when I'm looking at things. The rose hip is light on one side and dark on the other. That's what I'm going to take away from it because I don't have those colors to paint with. I'm limiting my palette. And I don't have to just do it with a palette knife. I'm going to be painting with a brush with my Liquin Impasto. If any of you try the Liquin Impasto, again, follow me at Ryan Martin Art. Direct message me, send me the photo. I want to see. I love seeing what other people are doing. I feel like I'm constantly learning. I love going to my colleagues' demos like these that they do because even though I've been painting professionally since for over 15 years, I'm always learning something new. Like, if not that, I'm at least getting reaffirmation, like I'm doing something right, or like, aha, that's what I've been doing. I didn't even realize that's what I do. And that's why I've been successful at that. Ryan, I just want to say you're an awesome, I didn't get to see the whole comment, but thank you. All I saw was awesome. Thank you so much. The way my camera is set up, it's kind of a little hard to see, but I want to make sure you had this really good camera to see the painting. Let's add a little bit of the dried parts on the top. And then this guy got thick, so I'm just going to kind of sneak it in a little more. I feel like there's got to be branches, right? So we could add some little branches and things, even though I'm not seeing all of them. Oh, no, I'm seeing some. You go like that. You could even scrape away little details if you want. I know that's probably a horrible noise, but you could scrape out areas with the Liquin Impasto and get some really cool techniques. All right, I wanted to make sure I covered a couple more things with oil painting. Again, feel free to chime in if you have any questions. We are going to do a little Q&A though. I'll try to leave like 10-15 minutes for that. But for now, this is kind of where my painting ended up. I want to compare it to the one I did before so you could see where not talking camera. It's a lot more finished, right? Refined. I did this in an hour and this one's like an hour and a half, but we're chatting more. Color is much more, this is kind of the way I usually paint, but you could see there's some things I'm learning today, just under pressure. I feel like I always surprise myself. Like I like this leaf more. These ones feel more realistic, but this one's a lot more fun to me. The color is a lot softer. I went real pink here, right? This one feels kind of more like this flower reminds me more of when I had would see in my childhood with my grandmother. When the paint dries, so this I did a couple weeks ago in preparation for this. You can see it's pretty dry to the touch. I mean, it's definitely dry to the touch. Inside, it's starting to get rock hard inside the Liquin Impasto paint. Now, other paintings I have similarly are just not dry yet. Like I have some undergrad paintings that, you know, eventually kind of cracked and stuff because they were just weren't drying properly. But if you put Liquin in every layer, you're gonna get a nice film to it. This is what it dries like. So I put Liquin in each layer and it dries kind of, you know, matte, but kind of semi glossy a little bit. You could see some of the gloss. Where I used more medium, it got a little more glossy. Well, actually, in this case, a lot more of the semi-gloss is showing through the Liquin original. So you could see that. I did want to cover something that I feel happens a lot, and it's varnishing. We always get a lot of questions with varnishing, like, how do I varnish a painting? Why is it important? And I will show you this old painting. I'm not actually going to varnish it in front of you because I feel like I wish I had seen this when I started oil painting. Now I lost the painting I was going to varnish. So I'm going to be varnishing this little painting. It's a little sketch I did of my friend, my coworker, painting. She was painting and I was painting her. We just did this really quick. Now it's been years since I painted this, but a lot of the darks got kind of matte. The surface is starting to take in dust, so I had to clean it yesterday. I got a wet cloth and carefully cleaned it and then let it dry thoroughly over the last day. But it's just not as vibrant as it used to be, and it's going to keep kind of accumulating dust the more I have it in my studio. And I want to be able to just wipe it with a rag easily or like a paper towel and not worry about scuffing up the painting. Over years of wiping it, it's going to start, it could start scratching and damaging the painting. So I want to protect it. If I start wiping it after I varnished it and the varnish is dry, then I'm only hurting the varnish. I'm not hurting my painting. And this is a painting of my friend. I know it's not the most epic painting like some of my other paintings I might do, I hope are epic, but this is, you know, I want to protect it. It's special to me. I remember this memory and I hold it very dearly. So I'm going to varnish it. To varnish a painting, we have different kinds of varnishes. We have spray varnishes. Whenever you're spraying something though, you want to make sure you're in a really well ventilated area. You want to make sure you have, you know, respiratory mask and stuff just so you're being safe. I'm going to put my camera down. But like I'm telling you, my experience is that it's just a lot easier for me to paint it on. Painting it, people don't like doing as much because you could get brush strokes in it and stuff. But for me, it works easier because on a smaller painting, because I don't have to worry about like all the safety prep. For this, I'm just making sure I'm kind of in a well-ventilated area. And then I'm going to have, I'm using this Artist Gloss Varnish. You want to make sure your painting is completely dry. I hardly ever varnish paintings because I would paint them and then they'd go in a show. You can't varnish them unless they've dried for, I think they recommend like 6 months to a year. So I hardly ever varnished a painting. The collectors kind of had to deal with it. But for this piece, you know, I feel like I should have varnished it quite a bit ago to kind of protect it. Again, some things in the back, so make sure, you know, you're in a well-ventilated area, not next to an open flame or fireplace or anything. And you're going to get your varnish, and you might see a lot of videos of people like pouring on the varnish. You really want to get an even layer and thin. So we don't recommend that, pouring it on there. If you ever need instructions, the instructions are going to be, let me close this first so I don't pour it all for myself. All right, is everyone counting how many little mishaps I have today? I feel like I never drop a tube in my paint and it's all happening today. So it'll have little instructions on here and like little, or actually this is just the warning label again, just to make sure you're using it properly. It says with UV protection as well, so hopefully it'll help out with that as well. It's removable, so if I don't like the varnish or it gets too dirty later, I could always remove it. For instructions, you're just going to put a little bit into a container. That was a lot more than I need. This is a small painting. And then you're going to want to get like the softest brush you have. So feel around for your softest brush. Mine typically are like fan brushes. Winsor Newton makes kind of, you know, big brushes for like glazing on stuff. And there are also some brushes you can find that are for varnish. I typically just buy the softest one I have, or grab one of them. This is just like a Winsor Newton Monarch brush. I'm gonna get a little bit of the varnish. It's pretty much like water. And the goal is to get a really even layer over everything. So I'm gonna get close here. I should not be stopping like I am, because you want to get it evenly distributed. I always try to make sure I have a lot of light so I could check the glare on it, make sure it covered everything. But you're gonna see it's gonna start to bring out the colors more a little bit. I'm not sure if it's showing on camera. The orange is definitely looking more like that. And this used to be kind of glossy when it was wet, and I want it to look like I just painted it. And this high gloss, or it's not high gloss, but it's the gloss varnish, is pretty glossy. So when I paint it in, you can see it's bringing out the colors more. When this dries, it's going to protect it. Try not to go over it too much, but I am trying to make sure it gets in there. If any area isn't going in, like if you have a glossier painting, kind of scrub it a little. Try not to make bubbles or anything, but just get as even as a layer as you can. And I'm working over it a few times because I'm noticing it's pooling a little bit. But I'm just trying to get the thinnest possible layer I can. And it looks like it's pretty much all covered. And that's how you varnish a painting. So it's not too scary. I would suggest varnishing something you're not in love with first, in case, you know, it doesn't go too well. You just have a little practice painting, just so you can get a feel of how it feels, because it feels different than like regular oil paint. I'm just trying to get rid of any pools I have. All right, so now I have it completely varnished. Oh no, see how it's a little less varnished there? I'm trying to do everything through camera, it's not working. Just make sure you cover that area. Let's see how it looks now. It's an even layer now. It is. So I'm going to set this somewhere where little flakes of dust won't get on. Your cat's not going to come walk around and leave a bunch of hair on it, you know, put it somewhere safe for a few hours. In a well-ventilated area, because you are going to smell it. It smells a lot more than like even like the mineral spirits I have and stuff like that. But it's gonna, when it dries up, it's gonna really protect the surface. So you can see how if you have it drying like this, it might kind of start slicking towards the bottom. So hold it flat, I mean, lay it flat. But I just wanted to show you how to varnish a painting. I don't know if you remember what it looked like a few seconds ago, but it looked really old, and now it looks like the day I painted it, and it'll stay protected. All right, everyone, we have 15 minutes. So I wanted to answer any questions you had. Let me flip my camera so you can see me. Let me switch my camera. I don't know if everyone is, I don't know where we're gonna unmute people to ask questions. I saw something about using varnish, gloss or not. I typically will use gloss varnish. That's just, yeah, it's a choice you have to make. It's hard. I have a lot of blacks in my painting. Like you can see, this one isn't varnished yet, but I want my blacks to get as dark as they can. If I use a matte, it's gonna dry kind of like this, where it's a more of a matte finish, but I want it to be really glossy later. So it depends how you want your painting to look. Is everyone writing them in the chat? I'm not sure if I could read all of them.
Diane did ask, do you prefer high gloss finish or a satin finish?
Oh yeah, for my work, I prefer the high gloss. Just because the way I usually work and the way my collectors want the work is they want it to look like slick, old, you know, classical oil paintings. If I was doing something more abstract, I might use something more matte. This one, when it's dry, I'll probably use a matte finish because there isn't a lot of darks that I want to kind of bring out again. So I'll probably leave it matte. I like the way it's kind of looking matte. It is just personal preference, and it is kind of nice when I didn't have to varnish the work because then it's the collector's choice. But now that I'm varnishing my own work, I do a lot more gloss.
If it's the collector's choice, do they varnish it themselves?
Yeah, I mean, some of them will, unfortunately, some of my collectors will just put my paintings in storage, and, you know, in hopes that, you know, if I make it in a museum one day, then, you know, resale value is high. So some of them never varnish their paintings, are just sealed shut really carefully. But ones that are on display, they'll typically have a consultant that'll come by and make sure the painting's in good condition still, and they'll have somebody varnish it for them professionally. So I've never really had to varnish any paintings that I've put in shows unless they were like, I just got a show back from New York, a couple paintings didn't sell. I'll probably end up varnishing those myself. So I'll make the choice for the collector, you know, it's gonna be high gloss, because it's kind of the aesthetic I'm kind of leaning towards more, the classical slick paintings like Vermeers.
That's good inside information. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or write them in the chat. So we have another question. When you're painting, are you considering the rule fat over lean? Just curious if this is something I need to think about when I'm doing small paintings.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I didn't go into it much today because we're painting a la prima, right? Like everything's just all wet and too wet. But when you are painting oil painting in many layers, like you'll see the ones I have behind me, I will be using, if I'm using art mediums, like I was talking about, where you're mixing your stand oil with your solvent, I'll always make sure I have, like, for the first layer, 5 parts Sansador, the solvent, and then maybe 1 part stand oil, let it dry. And then the next layer, put more fat, more oil, and then till it's about maybe equal parts. And then the last layers will have mostly oil. So it'll be like 3 parts, you know, stand oil and 1 part Sansador. But with most of my paints are using Liquin. So with Liquin, they recommend just putting Liquin in every layer. Since it dries so fast and it's pretty flexible, all the layers are flexible and I haven't had any cracking issues when I've been using the Liquin. I feel like if the first layers, if I thin it out too much with the Sansador, that's when I had issues. Like in undergrad school, I used to just paint with the terp basically and a little bit of pigment and then put Liquin on top. And I feel like the bottom part was a little too rigid or not strong enough, and then I had cracking there. So I'm putting Liquin in every layer, and it's been working really well. I know cracking is one of those scary things. You're like, oh no, it's gonna crack. But yeah, oil painting, it just fat over lean, always making sure of flexible layers on top of a more rigid one. And then it is good, even if you like painting terp a lot first, or the solvent first, to kind of block it in and lift out paint like a grisaille. It's good to still always put a little fat in there, just a little bit, at least a little bit of the oil, just because the oil is what's flexible and going to keep it from cracking.
So another question, are there any varnishes that are mixed with water?
There isn't. The only ones would be like if you're going to be doing acrylic painting, they have high, you know, if you're an acrylic painter, they have the high gloss varnish in there and glossy varnishes and matte varnishes. But for oil painting, it's mostly going to be all ones that are using oils. Because if you put something that's water-based on top of the oil, the oil layer is going to kind of reject it. So if you notice, like, oil always floats on top of water, the water's just soluble one's just going to beat up and not work too well on top of the oil.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, oh, by the way, thanks very much for the presentation, Ryan. It was a lot of fun to watch. I'm wondering about these new colors that Winsor Newton is putting out, and what is it that they're attempting to achieve with them? Do they add a new dimension to, you know, the artist's possibilities? Or, I mean, you know, you theoretically can mix any paint from the list of standard colors that they have. So I just wanted your view on that. I mean, they look very packed. I by the way, I posted the link on from the Winsor Newton website of
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. You'll see at the top of the artist oil color list, we have our new colors. I didn't even get to go over all of them. Orange Lac Minerals, another new one that we didn't use today. The warm brown pink's great. I like it for flesh tones and things. Smalt or Dumont's blue is actually a historic color that we had at one time, a swatch of color, when we're just kind of recreating it now. A lot of the colors we're trying to achieve, to answer that question, it's either always trying to build out more single pigment color ranges around the spectrum. And you're right, we have like a 6-color primary system or a 3-color one, and you can get a lot of the colors. The ones that are more unachievable, we're always trying to fill out that part of the spectrum, or just give people more options with transparency as well. Like we have a lot of oranges, but we didn't have, a transparent orange. So it's not only just the color spectrum, but it's the transparency. And then also the pigment. We're also always trying to put out, if we do have a color that we are only using, that's hard to achieve. If we find one that we can make with a single pigment, we'll, probably try to jump on that as well, it seems like. Another one is just what we notice people are using. If people are using a lot of the blues, this oriental blue is different than what we have. It might just be a tad different. Like I use this in place of my phthalocyanide, my phthalo blues and stuff now. And it's just a tiny bit different. Yeah, it's just that little extra edge. Artists know, like when you put out ultramarine blue and you see it in a painting, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So we're always trying to like mix it with something so it doesn't look straight out of the tube as much. So when you have those new colors, yeah, it's just refreshing a little bit, I think, to the artist eye, to the collector's eye. I hope that answers your question a bit.
Well, I think the reason for each one of them might be different. Like the one for orange, like a good transparent orange didn't, necessarily exist before. And
Yeah,
I guess
the only way we had it in history, they had transparent orange, but they had it from like cows that ate mango leaves, and then they would like kind of distill down the urine. So it was like processes we can't do today. So they're always trying to create a new synthetic way of, recreating those colors, and historic colors in this case, or some new ones.
So your answer raised one or two more questions. Like you referred to a single pigment paints, and I'm wondering, is there an advantage with using a single pigment paint when I can mix to get that paint? Like
Or the single pigment colors, if we do have like a single pigment color like oriental blue, we'll be able to mix the color similar, something pretty close to it probably. But the disadvantage is that if you're trying to create like a secondary color with pigments you mix together, you're just going to get a cleaner gray tone with the oriental blue. And the single pigment color theory is that if you have too many colors of pigment in your paint and the light bounces between all the pigments, it starts to muddy the color and make it look more unnatural, something we don't really see in nature as much. So single pigment colors lets us achieve kind of that little light flow that actually exists more in nature, the cleaner kind of light that our eyes kind of capture. So that's kind of the theory behind it. So the less pigments is going to be a little easier to kind of understand visually.
I see that on the description there, that historically it was made from mixing Prussian blue and ultramarine, but now it's a single pigment.
Yeah. So
Well,
before
I
it was
wasn't aware that oriental blue was a thing. Like it was a.
Me neither. I know every time I feel like there's always new colors coming out, or ones they look at historically. Sometimes they're like phthalocyanide, it was poisonous, so we can't have that on the market. But yeah, they're able to recreate and bring back colors that were once unsafe, or we just can't, make them at a level so we could, supply every art store with them,
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
So because of time, this might be the last question we take. What are some of the ways to tell if a layer has finished drying, particularly if you aren't using Liquin or another fast drying medium?
The best way to tell if it's dry?
Yes.
The best way I've been able to thoroughly test, is really just painting swatches of color, especially depending on where you live. So paint a swatch of color and then be able to kind of dig into your paint with your nail and be like, is it thoroughly dried? Oil painting, I think you really just have to lean on the side of being kind of conservative with that and being like, it feels dry, it looks dry, it's bending and looks like it's really set up, but let me wait another few weeks before I varnish it, or a month or two. or I really always just take that's why the question was asked. But with oil paint out of the tube, you're definitely it's not gonna dry thoroughly for 2 weeks. It might not completely cure, even if you're painting a thin layer, for longer than that. It's just the way the oil paint, it has all these great properties for being really smooth and wet. But yeah, that's just the only downside is the drying time, if that's a downside for you. But yeah, before I put on another layer, I'll always make sure I wait a week. Even if I'm using the Liquin, I just wait a week just to be safe. And then if it's varnishing, I just wait the 6 months to a year. Thicker paint, a year. Flatter paint, just the 6 months. Oh yeah, you can follow me at, this might be reversed, so maybe take a screenshot. I'm not sure my camera.
It's good.
Oh, good. Sometimes it gives a mirror image. Ryan Martin Art on Instagram, or ryanmartinart.com is my website as well. You could always email me or direct message me, and I typically get back within a day or so. Also follow aboveground.to, and then TFACNA is where I do a lot of demos. I usually do 2 or a month or something, but there's a lot of artists like me that are on there doing demos as well. It's great to see. And then of course, follow Winsor Newton. They're always posting kind of the new colors they have and some new news and things like that about the brand. And thanks so much too for having me.